The galaxy is burning. Brother fights brother, and treason splits the Imperium of Man. This is the Age of Darkness. Welcome to the Remembrancers retreat, coming to you from within the depths of the Vengeful Spirit.
Welcome to another episode of the Remembrancers Retreat. I'm your intrepid adjunct host, Jason, and today we are taking all of you guys through the Iron Warriors and why they're terrific. I got two co-hosts with me today. We got Steven.
Hello.
And we have Brennan.
Hi, how's everybody doing?
So, Brennan, you are our guest host today, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you've been playing Horus Heresy since the second edition here, coming over from 40K, right?
Yes, that is definitely. I'm definitely an X40K player.
Delightful. Always happy to hear it. Tell us about your Iron Warriors. Like, what drew you in? What makes you love them? Tell us fun stuff.
So I started playing Iron Warriors back in, I want to say, 7th edition, 40K. I really like their fluff. I really like that they're just like these cold, bitter guys that are really effective at doing what they do. They're specialists at blowing stuff up well and just wrecking things. And they are not, they're not fanatics. They're not what a lot of the other legions are. They're not overly emotional. They're just there to get the job done, and they are efficient and work. And contrasting some of the other Chaos Legions that are just a lot of dumpster fire energy, where they, like World Eaters that just run around in bands, just burning down churches and stuff. And you're like, did that achieve our tactical objectives? No, but I like to see that church burn down. The Iron Warriors contrast that, and I like Hazard Stripes. I mean, you gotta like Hazard Stripes if you're gonna play the 4th. And I enjoy dry brushing, so a lot of the painting and hobbying techniques went really well along with the efficiency of the rules. I like sort of efficient, streamlined rules, and I think 2.0 does an amazing job of reflecting that. Yeah, I could talk about this all day, but I'm very excited to be here.
Big dumpster fire energy is... I like that.
That sounds pretty accurate.
Yeah.
That's the best way to describe every legion, but especially the traitor legions.
Oh, definitely. Just
all dumpsters are on fire, but some dumpsters are more on fire than others.
Yeah, but if you push those dumpsters belligerently towards your objective, you'll probably at least set them on fire.
Yeah. It's great.
So, we're going to be going through the Iron Warriors today, and I've been a huge fan of them too since the first edition. I actually pretty often use, just lightly borrow some of the Domitar Ferrum for my Alpha Legion. Those are always one of my favorite things to use with rewards at Treasury. But to check these guys out, starting out in the Liber Hereticus on page 174 here, Brennan, why don't you take us through what makes them special with Legionis Astartes and the Rack and Ruin rule?
Yeah, so I really like this rule to begin with, and I really think it does a good job of just representing the fluff and just representing what you want to do as an Iron Warriors player. And so essentially, it's a pretty big chunk of text, so I'm not going to read you the whole text, but the simplest thing, well, I guess it's not that big of a long test when I actually look at it, but basically, if you make a shooting attack with a unit, with a model, you make a shooting attack or a melee, you get +1 to the strength of that attack if it is a dreadnought, automaton, vehicle, or building unit type. So it is excellent at essentially giving strength to things that you may struggle to wound in the first place, or to penetrate the armor of something like that has a higher armor. It has a lot of really subtle effects, but it's so simplistic that it's amazing for beginner players like myself to use because basically you go, am I trying to hurt a dreadnought automaton, a vehicle, or a building? Okay, just remember to give my weapon +1 strength. It is arguably one of the most straightforward Legion traits across the board.
It does seem to add a lot of utility too. Even just a +1 strength kind of opens up, makes some weapons kind of viable, like light anti-tank weapons now. Uh,
Yep.
just from that +1, from like Nemesis bolters are now strength 6, autocannons are now strength 8. A lot easier
Yeah.
to
I mean,
crack stuff open.
you can glance down rhinos in the front armor with bolters at strength 5.
Oh yeah, that is entertaining as heck. Just dump a Fury of the Legion into some poor bastard rhino.
Just blow the tracks off or shoot through the vision slits.
Beautiful.
So I wrote down some ridiculous examples of this if you'd like some. If I know there's some people in the audience
Absolutely.
that are like, why aren't they talking about numbers? Like, I love numbers. They're my best friends. So here's some numbers for you, right? Here's
More
some numbers.
ridiculous, the better.
So like a demolisher cannon, right? We're talking about strength 12, right? That goes to strength 13,
Whew.
and then a die 6 means that you're auto glancing AP 14. You're also, with that particular weapon, you've got ordnance, so you're rolling 2d6, and it's also sunder. I mean, like it needs more rules. It's also sunder, so it's re-rolling them if you want. So if you really, really have to auto pin basically a armor 14, you can do it with a demolisher cannon. This example is particularly ridiculous. So with a sniper rifle, you can pin a land raider.
Beautiful.
So strength 5 goes to strength 6, right? You add a d6 for the roll. If you get a 6, you rend, which means you roll another d3, and congratulations, you can get up to the number 15 with that.
Perfection.
So you can
Just-
absolutely shoot through the vision slit,
Just putting a mass
into the
reaction
driver
straight
and
into the
take him
driver.
out. Yep. Yep.
Love it.
But I think the really cool examples are what Jason was mentioning, which is you can move a lot of stuff from wounding on a 6 to wounding on a 5, which doesn't sound like much, but that's doubly efficient, right? So like
Literally double.
yeah, so if if you've got a strength 6 situation versus a strength 8, that's a big difference. If you've got like trying to think of another example, like it's not exactly double, but a situation where normally you'd be wounding, say, like a contemptor with a bayonet, right? Which was a situation we had the other game. Where normally, like, you would need a 6 to do that, I think, right? 4 + 1 is 5 versus 7
Right.
is, yeah. But the Warlord trait, I mean, the Legion trait is moving you to wounding on a 5 or a 6, which, again, this makes a big difference. So, yeah, I think you see a lot of this in the mid tiers with the 6s and the 7s, where you're just turning weapons that and the 5s that have, like, no business glancing rhinos to death, or like, oh, there's no way this guy's gonna hurt me. Like, I was playing a game where I was like, all right, I've got my predator cannon on my predator, right? It's strength 9 now.
Yeah, it's like a tiny las cannon that rends.
Yeah, and my
And las
opponent was
cannons
like,
become even bigger.
my opponent was like, what? And I was like, yep, it's strength 9. I'm sorry. And so, yeah, I think it's great.
All right, and
I mean, Go ahead.
I don't think we should overlook the most important part is that it is hilarious to bayonet a dreadnought to death.
Speaking of, I mean, so I play Fury of the Ancients for my Iron Warriors, and almost everybody has heavy bolters, and the heavy bolter is great against infantry. But even once you bump it up to strength 6, I played against a lot of armored units at Nova, And I was like, okay, I'm just going to focus 7 dreadnoughts on this tank and heavy bolter it to death. And I did.
Beautiful.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it really does. It really does open up a lot of tactical situations. The only situation you're ever like sad face about is if you happen to face that um, all Terminator list, right?
Uh,
Or all infantry list, where you're like, okay, well, my warlord trait, I mean, my legion trait. I keep saying warlord trait. Sorry, my legion trait does not apply here. But it's really rare that someone doesn't have one of these things. As often, they're some of the best units in the game. I mean,
Yeah.
Contemptor dreadnoughts
Contemptors
show
are
up in
out
almost
there almost in
every
everyone's
list.
list. Yeah. Now,
Exactly. Everybody likes a vehicle.
I will say, in that same vein, and I may end up being the poo pooer of this episode. We'll find out. But I really actually prefer the Iron Warrior's old Legion trait to this one. Not that I don't like Rack and Ruin giving +1 strength, but as you said, it's very straightforward. Uh, it's very easy for new players to wrap their heads around and make a use of pretty much with any unit. Um, my only problem with it, if you can even call it a problem, is that it really pushes Iron Warriors into a shooting gunline army. And their old rule, their old version of Rack and Ruin, was that models with the Legiones Astartes Iron Warrior do not suffer morale checks from shooting attacks and may re-roll failed pinning checks, which I loved. I saw somebody with a list that was just like 4 huge blocks of despoilers just walking up the table and not caring that you shot them until they could punch you in the face, which
Yeah,
was fun.
I could speak to this. Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I had a squad. We are doing a wonderful slow grow league in Richmond at Battlegrounds. And if you're in the area and you can join, we'd love to have you. It's a really great community. And I had a squad of assault marines that I had previously painted from 40K that I really like. And the utility of them is difficult. I think if you're coming into list building and you have one melee unit in an Iron Warriors list, I think you will often be discouraged because you're most likely one dedicated melee unit. You're going to be discouraged because you're going to run into the problem where, when you assault, you're guaranteed to get an Overwatch on you if you're the charger. You often will be out there in the middle of man's land. Like you're kind of putting yourself out if you're playing more of like a stand back and shoot army, if you have one dedicated melee unit. So there is that issue, but I would say the counter to that, which I've kind of come to organically embrace over the course of playing them, is that units that are not necessarily all melee but have some shooting that can still mix it up are still a lot of fun. And I would say the example that I'm currently using in the slow grow league is I'm running 2 contemptors with a fist and a gravis melta. And that combination means that I can put them in the midfield. I can mix it up with pretty much anybody. And I've got a really amazing gun that has a lot of utility at the mid-range. And it's a contemptor, it's got a lot of inbuilt natural things that protect it from getting
7
wrecked.
wounds. He's not going down easy.
Yeah, and so I think if you approach it that way, I think it's a lot more fun. Because again, your melee weapons also benefit from this. So lots of change swords with shred. Yeah, that difference in a pip on the dice from potentially wounding something from a 6 to a 5. Well, you throw shred on that, and all of a sudden, that really makes a big difference. And a lot of melee lightning claws, chain swords, they have that potential there. But yeah, I mean, I think if you are going into list building and you're going to make an all melee list, It's not going to be the strongest possible list. But again, I like Horus Heresy because most people, I think, are not going into this with the mentality that they're meta
Definitely.
chasing and making the strongest list.
Yeah.
So I still think you should. I would hesitate people who are trying Iron Warriors to get into that rut where they go, well, this is a melee unit or it has a lot of melee in it. I guess I can't play it. Like I would say, put it on the tabletop, have a good time with it, because especially that midfield, Iron Wars really wants some people in the midfield that can be scrappy. And so throwing some contemptors with a gun in the midfield, I've had a lot of fun with that.
Yeah, and I think that's probably once we get to the Iron Warriors advanced reaction, I think it illustrates perfectly what you're saying. But we'll get to that in a bit.
Well, perfect segue into the Iron Warriors advanced reaction, Bitter Fury.
Hooray!
All right, Steve, you want to take us through how awesome this is?
Yeah, so Bitter Fury. This advanced reaction may be made once per battle during the opposing player's shooting phase when any enemy unit declares a shooting attack targeting a friendly unit under the reactive player's control. To make a lot of text short, it's very similar to Return Fire. But once the active player has resolved all to hit and to wound rolls and armor saves are made, but before any damage mitigation rolls or casualties are moved, the reactive player makes a shooting attack targeting that unit. They add 1 to the die of any rapid fire, or actually any shooting attack that they're making. So, like at 24 inches, instead of 1 bolter fire coming back, it's 2 bolter shots. The downside is that they do get hot on a 1 or a 2. Any attack that makes a shooting attack as part of a Bitter Fury may not make any attacks indirectly without line of sight, including weapons with the barrage rule or other special rules that otherwise ignore line of sight, and vehicles may only fire defensive weapons. Template weapons use Wall of Death. So it's basically Return Fire on steroids. I love this one. I used it a whole lot at Nova. And to piggyback on what Brennan was saying, when you get up into the midfield with shooting units that still have combat weapons, they want to be on objectives or they want to be basically boxing in the enemy. So like tacticals with chainswords, for instance, or veterans. Bitter Fury is fantastic. You take the first round of shooting on whatever, and as soon as you're in range, you give it right back, but twice. And who cares if dudes die to get hot, because they're going to die anyway.
It is kind of nice because it takes like that extra step up from in like a tactical v tactical fight, firing on one another. It's actually the one that like returns fire that got shot at first that's kind of at a disadvantage because they don't, or at an advantage because they don't count as moving for purposes of Fury of the Legion. So typically, same size tactical squads firing back and forth at each other. I don't know, what would you call that? The initial aggressor in that situation is kind of at a disadvantage. This, too, I've seen really make people second and even third guess their target priority because, sure, like you want to knock out that heavy weapons squad, but if they're just going to absolutely annihilate whatever shot at them with Bitter Fury before you take them out, you're going to have to really weigh that before you decide which unit you're going to try and sacrifice to do it.
Mm-hmm. And it works great on units that are otherwise they want to be in melee, like Terminators, right? But they still have guns. They have combi bolters. So if you're trying to weigh down Terminators under weight of fire and they Bitter Fury back, they're hitting you with 10 combi bolters firing twice, re-rolling misses.
Beautiful.
And then, they still got 2 wounds. They still got their 2 up. What I really, really love Bitter Fury on is Dreadnoughts. A Dreadnought with a dual Volkite Culverin, that's normally, 6 shots with Deflagrate. Bitter Fury, that's 12 shots, twin-linked with Deflagrate. You're going to have a really bad time after that Dreadnought is done with you.
Gross.
So what I've enjoyed about it is when I first started playing, I was like, oh, las cannons, like heavy weapon squads, las cannons. No one would where no one would deign to shoot at this glorious squad, with its
Right, because you're gonna
bitterness
eat. Yeah, you're
returning
gonna eat all
fire.
that lasers back.
Yeah, but like as I went on, I've gotten into this kind of progression where a lot of the bitter fury shots, I'm using them more on weapons, and I in the future want to use them more on weapons that either have a special effect for rolling high, or they're just really really high volume,
Hmm.
because if you're doubling your shots, obviously mathematically you want your initial gun to shoot more. So like, a 20-man brick of dudes, of tactical squads, if they're in rapid fire range and they normally shoot 2 because of that, now they're shooting 4, right? It's just a huge jump up. Or like auto cannons that shoot twice are now shooting 4, or the heavy version of Volkite is now shooting what, 10 shots
Hmm.
for a heavy support.
10
And
shots.
the beauty thing about that is that um, if you get hot, right, you're only taking the profile of the gun. You're not taking any of the special effects. Whereas
Hmm.
if you get hot with a las cannon, you're dead. Like your model is, there's literally nothing it can do unless it has an invulnerable save. And I don't think there's much rocking a las cannon and also rocking an invulnerable save. So it's just dead. Whereas if you get hot with a bunch of Volkite or autocannons, it's not as, or a sniper rifle, it's not as big of a deal because you've still got your armor save. And if you got an apothecary or something like that, it's almost impossible. Like I did bitter fury with like a block of, like, I think by that point in the game it had like 15 tacks in it that were shooting twice. So I was rolling blocks of 4 shots for each of them. And a bunch of them were get hots, but they were either making their armor save or making their apothecary save. So really, like, I didn't lose a single guy. So at first, I think there's that fear of the effects of get hot, but with a weapon that is not AP2 or AP3 or God forbid AP1, you're not likely to lose a lot of your own people. So then, yeah, what was Jason was saying, it's really scary if you are targeting that unit knowing it's just going to drop a bucket of dice on you, and at the end when the dust clears it hasn't even lost a person to its own get hot rule.
Yeah, I mean, and even if you do lose a tactical to get hot, I'd pay 10 points to fire a bolter 4 times.
Yeah, and the Iron Warriors are certainly going to pay that cost, like,
Yeah, they're used to doing
absolutely.
65% casualties and above.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. One of my favorite passages from Iron Warriors book is, it's in one of the 40K ones where the commander, essentially this Iron Warrior commander, orders these 2 las cannons, heavy weapon guys, to knock out like a wall, and he knocks out the wall, and the return fire from the defenders kills the 2 las cannon guys, and the captain doesn't even look at them, like doesn't even blink an eye that he just lost 2 heavy weapon guys, because they did the thing he needed them to do, and
Yeah,
beyond
the
that,
wall is broken.
yeah, he didn't care about the casualties. And so, yeah, I think if you do that math, that's part of it, where you're like, yeah, I'm going to punish them so much for shooting at this unit.
And a little fun fact about that as well is, normally template weapons are only D3 hits. Well, template weapons with Bitter Fury is 2D3, and that adds up.
Well, speaking of stuff adding up, let me tell you guys about the Warlord traits, uh, because they're kind of entertaining. So, Iron Warrior's Warlord traits are a little bit, I don't know, they feel a little bit unique as compared to like coming off of the Emperor's Children. So, none of them are locked Loyalist or Traitor, which is kind of nice. But starting off, we've got Tyrant of the Apollocron. Warlord with this trait gains Fearless, but can't join any units that is not entirely composed of Iron Warriors. However, Warlord and models in the unit must adhere to the following restrictions during both the player's shooting and charge phase. The unit must attempt a shooting attack and/or charge if there's an enemy unit within range, and must target the closest enemy unit possible that's within its line of sight and is a valid target for shooting attacks or charges. And of course, if two or more targets are equidistant, you can choose. So in addition, you also get a extra shooting phase reaction, which not too shabby. Off the top, this feels a little bit restrictive. It essentially gives them like programmed behavior from unchaperoned automata, which fearless is nice, but when you can just take a herald anyway, which are pretty like you wouldn't think fear one and fearless would be, it's such a simple rule set, but along with that Legion banner that gives whatever unit they're with line, that's pretty solid. So, trading something like that for the downsides of having, the bad part of program behavior, not quite as fun.
I would argue that Tyrant of the Apollocron is pretty good in small scale games or Zone Mortalis, where you have restricted force orgs. So, like, you take a big 20-man block of tacticals, right? Or a 5-man block of veterans, guys who can take power weapons, heavy weapons, and are relentless. You give them Tyrant of the Apollocron, bam, fearless. And because they can take such a wide variety of equipment, they're basically they're set to take on any target that the Warlord trait forces them to. Secondarily, I would say that Tyrant of the Apollocron on a Terminator Warlord is probably better than either Lasatra or Dodecathon, which we'll get into here. Because when you take Terminators, right, you're usually putting them in a tank. And if they're inside of a tank, then they don't have to worry about programmed behavior forcing them to engage targets other than who you want them to. And then once they hop out and get into combat, you can throw them into combat with anybody, and they're fearless.
It does make them very consistent and difficult to remove. I mean, anything natively fearless, like, of course, the downside to the Herald is if the Herald dies, the unit's no longer line. It's no longer fearless.
Yep. And the Herald's relatively fragile compared to, like, a Praetor.
Yeah, that's a good point. Two, having a unit-wide fearless, there are not a whole lot of things that interact with it weird, but like Brennan and I just had a game a couple of days ago, or we had that discussion on Sonic Shriekers, because Fearless is set up a little bit oddly as a rule. The model itself ignores fear, and consequently anything that, models that have Fearless ignore fear effects, ignore this rule. For me, Sonic Shriekers, of course, is first and foremost in my mind. When one model has Fearless, the unit ignores morale, pinning, passes those automatically, but only the model itself ignores fear, which is a little odd, and it's kind of like a janky rules interaction. But comparatively, something like this, where, the Warlord is, like you said, a lot more resilient than a 2-wound, console, is pretty handy.
Yeah, so I definitely agree, Jason. Definitely, that was one of those rules that, like, sometimes you really just have to see it in print. And even though I'd read the Fearless rule, in my mind, I just summarized it. You know how you do that thing cognitively, where you're just like, I'm just going to summarize this in my brain.
Oh, yeah, no worries.
Summarize in my brain was the unit's fearless. And so then when it was like, no, he's the only one. I was like, wait a minute, my brain summary says that they're all fearless. And then I broke out the big book, and I was like, oh, no, he's 100% right. So that was an interesting learn. I personally, my main issue with this is, I think, and maybe this is some of the fluff spilling over into the play, but I feel like if you play Iron Warriors, you might have some OCD problems, because they certainly do.
They do.
And so, like, the idea of playing my army and having my Warlord's unit potentially be carted around the board by its nose, like, really bothers me. Like, it really makes it not very interesting to me. But that being said, I think what Jesse said, which is if I was going to use this, I would try to make a close combat monster. I would put it in a squad of termies, and then I would just like throw it at everything. And yeah, if it's charging the closest unit, well, it's probably what I wanted to do anyways. If it doesn't, if they're like lightning claws, terminators, I don't really care. They don't have any guns anyways, so they're just going Pac-Man style around the board trying to eat everything. And so having a fearless block is good. I mean, fearless isn't as good in my opinion on Terminators outside of combat because of their rules. Um, but yeah, I mean, Fearless is really, really powerful. Like, I definitely play Herald Centurion. It's one of my favorite model unit things in the game. And, when you put a block of like 20 tacticals, is how I use it with an apothecary. That is a really obnoxious unit to get off the board. They often last the whole game. And, when you combine it with Bitter Fury and other reactions, they're a really obnoxious unit with the Herald. Now, I have been in games where, their head exploded like a melon from a sniper rifle on the first turn. And I was like, well, that just happened, and you just kind of
Those
laugh at
games
it and you
happen.
just move on. But yeah, I definitely feel like this one's a tough sell. I rate this pretty low as far as the Warlord. I would probably actually take a generic Warlord trait from the main book over this one.
Right. Like bloody handed is never not going to be useful.
Bloody handed or stoic defender. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Brennan, you normally use the next one, right? Tyrant of the Dodecathon.
Absolutely.
And besides sounding kind of like a Pokemon, like other than that, I think this one's kind of all positives. Why don't you tell us about it?
Yeah, so Tyrant of Dodecathon is really a great one. I'll just read it really quickly. Basically, after everybody has deployed, but before scout moods and infiltrators, the controlling player, the warlord, essentially nominates one area of terrain, building, or fortification on the battlefield. This item, if it's an area of terrain, so like a piece of ruins, it no longer has a cover save. If it has a cover save, my apologies, it no longer has a cover save, and the area of terrain counts as both difficult terrain and dangerous terrain. If you choose a building or fortification, then all rolls on the building and damage table made for the building or fortification gain the modifier +1. In addition, and this is a big one from Iron Warriors, the warlord who has this trait may make an additional reaction during the opposing shooting player's phase as long as the warlord has not been removed as a casualty. So it gives you a shooting reaction, which in my opinion, and maybe this is because I'm an Irons Warrior player, is one of the strongest categories of reactions, mainly because of the how often you're shooting things and things are shooting at you, even more than getting charged. It comes up.
It's a
I
shooting
really,
game.
yeah, I really like this one across the board. I think it's great. I mean, honestly, I think you just can't really go wrong with it. You might not be 100% optimized. There might be another decision that ultimately you decide is a better for your particular playstyle or your army. But I think especially for new players, I strongly, strongly recommend this. It sounds like not much, but I'll give you two quick examples that illustrate the power of this warlord trait. The first example is you're playing an army that kind of maybe is a shooty army or has a significant squad that is hunkered down in a piece of ruin somewhere. Removing the cover save from that squad and then also making it so that if that squad ever wants to come out of that building and say hold a backfield objective or is ever forced to run because the squad broke, the fact that it is now subtracting 2 from that movement and also making some fun dangerous terrain check is important, is a big one. The other example is what I have done a lot is just pick a line blocking piece of terrain in the center of the board. So if there's a piece of terrain that I believe my opponent is going to try to move through and use as a cover, or it's literally just providing, say, like a tank hiding behind it, a cover save. Like I'm shooting through a window or something, and it's giving it a cover save. Removing that cover save and making this like awful piece of burning wreckage in the middle of the board for my opponent to go through is also really, really game changing. I had a game at Call to Arms in Williamsburg where I played a Blood Angel player, and they had a lot of jump infantry. They had a lot of small vehicles that wanted to find cover, and just removing the giant centerpiece, essentially making it useless for him. It changed the game. It like completely flipped his ability to defend himself. This is my favorite of the 3 warlord traits. I think it is excellent.
It's a cool one. And normally, so coming from 6th edition Chaos Space Marines, I've always been kind of, what's the word? Unimpressed with like abilities that modify terrain. Because like the old Warsmith used to just be able to reduce the cover save of a piece of terrain by 1. I'm like, whatever. So I was actually kind of down on Dodecathon until I read the whole thing, and I was like, oh, wait a second, fortifications? This thing is amazing. I love it.
Yeah, I mean, you can't complain about it. I mean, like Brennan said, essentially just wiping out that huge part of terrain that like otherwise would, give your opponent this huge resource for like, skimming casualties off, from cover saves.
Yeah. Poor mortals.
Yeah.
Yep.
They can't all be winners.
Yeah, and I would say that one of the marks of how good a warlord trait is how useful it is if you were in a mirror match, like if you're playing another Iron Warriors player. And Iron Warriors player, they want to put their havocs in buildings, they want to put their long range tanks in cover. Tyrant of the Dodecathon, just boop, nope, come out in the open. You're out here with me, buddy.
Get out of that apartment block. Rinse do.
Yep.
Yeah, and I also think it's one of those things where the extra reaction in the shooting phase is almost worth it to me. Like it really, really is. Like you're gonna get shot at so much, and so just getting an extra evade, even if you can't return fire, even if they're out of range, whatever, just getting an extra evade is huge for so many units. Getting a 5-up damage mitigation shrouded roll, that's a big deal. And so whereas, a lot of times in the movement, you might go whole rounds where you can't do a movement reaction, for example, or a charge reaction. No one's charging you for a round or two. But every round, I'd be shocked if every round you didn't get shot. Like very rarely, unless you're doing drop pod assault or something, are you not going to take probably 2 shots. And so getting 2 things to take shrouded, if you do nothing else, that's a very nice defensive bonus.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, it's just like a third of your shooting casualties just bloop, gone.
Yeah, and evade also gives you a movement, doesn't it? Can't you move up to your initiative, or maybe you just kind of spread out? Maybe I'm thinking of a different rule.
That's a movement reaction.
Yeah, evade is a movement.
Oh, so it is. So it is.
As I call it, the ole. Yes, you wave your flag and scoot back like a matador.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of taking all that shooting, Tyrant of the Lasatra, warlord with this trait, and every model with the infantry type that is joined with the Legionis Astartes Iron Warrior special rule, roll an additional dice when making a shooting attack with any rapid fire, assault, or heavy weapon that does not have blast or template, but these weapons gain the Get Hot special rule for that shooting attack. If the warlord in any unit under the effect of this trait makes Bitter Fury reaction, then a single additional die is added to the number of attacks made by each model after the effects of Bitter Fury have been applied. So I like that they just immediately cut that rules as intended v rules as written argument off at the knees. It's like, no, this is how math works. That's how it goes.
Yeah, I appreciate it as a new player.
Yeah. And the downside, however, which, that sounds real good right off the bat. The downside, though, is in addition, whenever Warlord with this trait and any unit is joined as the target of an enemy shooting attack, it must, underline, must make either the return fire or bitter fury reactions if possible. This reaction does not cost a point of the reactive player's reaction allotment, but does not allow that unit to make further reactions and doesn't allow bitter fury to be used more than once. However, a warlord with this trait and any unit that it is joined can make no other reaction in any phase excepting only the interceptor advanced reaction. That's what kinda you had me up until that very last sentence, which seems brutal.
Yeah, Tyrant of the Lasatra, in my experience, is very, very niche.
It seems one-dimensional.
It is not great on anything other than tacticals, really, just because you have so many of them and you want all that extra weight of fire. And like Brennan said earlier, if they get hot, they've got a 3-up and a 5-up Feel No Pain to protect them.
It seems like it might be okay on Terminators, but even then, it's like you don't really want your Terminators getting hot.
Generally speaking, I would still rather take Apollicron or Dodecathon if I'm putting my Warlord with Terminators. But all that being said, Tyrant of the Lasatra is a plus Warlord trait in one very, very specific instance.
Yeah?
And that's Fury of the Legion. Or not Fury of the Legion, Fury of the Ancients. In my Fury of the Ancients list, for instance, so like Tyrant of the Apollicron, not useful to Dreadnoughts because they're already fearless in combat.
Clearly.
Tyrant of the Dodecathon is okay. It's not bad, but most of your Dreadnought weapons aren't punching through armor anyway if you're trying to like keep them relatively cheap. So the lack of cover save or the difficult and dangerous terrain they don't really care about. It's okay for a revered ancient. And before I get into Tyrant of the Lasatra, I will give this reminder. If you play Fury of the Ancients, one of your Contemptors becomes an HQ. He gets a Warlord trait. He gets Eternal Warrior. He gets an Iron Halo. So what I do is I take Tyrant of the Lasatra, and I give my Warlord a dual Volkite Culverin. So normally, Strength 6, which, if I have to fire at infantry, does the trick. If I have to fire at tanks or other dreadnoughts, gets bumped up to Strength 7. So we're in a nice high-strength weapon. It already has high volume of fire. It's Heavy 6, which Tyrant of the Lasatra bumps up to Heavy 7. With Gets Hot, but it's twin-linked, and my Dreadnought is Ballistic Skill 5. So right there, the downside is kind of mitigated. I'm only missing on a 1, which I can reroll anyway. And then it gets to Bitter Fury and Return Fire. Dreadnoughts are already fairly difficult to wound. If you're throwing bolters at it, then you're hoping it's just like buckets and buckets and buckets of bolters, right? And as the Iron Warriors player, you're not worried. You're going to bounce it off that 2-up save. But then you are required to return fire with a Heavy 7 Deflagrate gun, or if it's really a pain in the ass, Heavy 14 Deflagrate.
Can't complain.
It's beautiful and I love it.
I'm glad to hear it.
I have wiped an entire tactical squad just off the board with bitter fury from Tyrant of the Lasatra once. It was amazing.
All right.
Yeah, I think it. For me, this is like a kind of like a low. This is like out of a scale of 10. I'd rate this like a 4 or maybe a 5. I mean, I think the problem for me as a player is the lack of a built-in second reaction.
Right.
You get a free reaction for that guy or for that model, right, or unit. So you can still make it powerful if it is something like Jesse's saying, where it's his warlord. It's a character dreadnought effectively. I mean, that's pretty cool. So you're going to use that a lot. That's going to be a scary unit that people are going to not want to shoot at, which is great, which is what you want, for your warlord to be a thing that people don't want to shoot at, especially if it's a double gun dreadnought. But the lack of a second reaction, the fact that you can't evade So you have to either return fire or bitter fury, that you don't have the option of evade, because there's just situations where you're like, no, I don't want to shoot. I want the chance to potentially, like, the game that me and Jason were playing recently, he had snipers that are out of range of my last cannon squad. So my last cannon squad couldn't actually return fire, but it could evade. So having the option of evade was definitely keeping people alive. But in this squad, they would have just been shot with impunity. So I don't know. It's a tough one for me. I think, again, I think like Jesse said, it's niche. If you can find a situation it works in well, then by all means. But I think, for at least for new players, I would caution against it, because it may be more frustrating than it is. And because essentially it's taking something you already do, right? You already have Bitter Fury. If you want to shoot out a bunch of nasty return shots, you got that in your Legion reaction. It takes something you already does and makes it better, not incredibly better, but better. And so sometimes I think that's not as fun. Like, maximizing something even more to a diminishing return is not necessarily as fun as being like, oh, I can do this other thing. Cool. I have this other option. So I would just consider, as a new player, playing it if you have a plan, but maybe picking a different warlord trait if you're, just putting models on the board and trying to have a good time.
Yeah, it's definitely a niche one. Otherwise, I would agree with you and rate it pretty low, because I think the only character that would like specifically find a use for it would be an Armistos. But the weapon that you would probably want him to be double tapping is a blast weapon, a plasma cannon, which it doesn't apply to. So sad times for the Lysatra men, but good times if they're a dreadnought.
Yeah. So, overabundance of fire, some might say, I think plays pretty well as we head into Rites of War here. So we've got the Hammer of Olympia first and foremost. Now, this is the one, if I ever played Iron Warriors, I know it's kind of cliche, but I love so much the idea of just huge, chunky bricks of like tactical squads advancing inexorably, kind of competing with the Death Guard for that niche there. But I think Iron Warriors do it really well. This is kind of what I would want to build towards, having bare minimum of 1,000 points out of a 2,500 point army, just huge chunky tactical bricks, making the most of Hammer of Olympia. So we've got, for the effects, all Legion tactical squads composed entirely of models with Iron Warrior special rule must replace Fury of the Legion with Fury of Olympia, because that's the one downside, well, two, I guess, because on those super cool shrapnel bolters, you've got an 18-inch range, and you cannot Fury of the Legion with them because they are not bolt guns. But Fury of Olympia is a model with this special rule may add 1 to the number of shots fired whenever making a shooting attack with a shrapnel bolter or shrapnel pistol, however not with a shrapnel cannon or Gravis shrapnel cannon or any other bolt weapons. So, kind of builds back.
Jason, do we want to pause and just talk about, because we haven't actually explained what a shrapnel bolter does. Do we want to pause and go over that war gear, or do we want to come back to that later?
Now's the perfect time to explain what the Iron Warriors are working with those shrapnel weapons. So why, you might ask, is this important? Olympian shrapnel weapons are great for the Iron Warriors. Any model with the Iron Warriors and independent character special rules can exchange a bolt pistol for a shrapnel pistol or bolter for shrapnel bolter for no points. Any unit composed entirely of models with Iron Warriors can upgrade all bolt pistols and bolters for their shrapnel variant, or all heavy bolters for shrapnel cannons at a cost of 2 points per weapon. Any unit composed of models with a vehicle type can exchange all heavy bolters in the unit for shrapnel cannons for 2 points per weapon. And any unit composed entirely of models with the dreadnought type can exchange all Gravis bolt cannons for Gravis shrapnel cannons for 5 points. So compared to your normal strength 4, AP 5, 12-inch range pistol. For the bolt pistol, your shrapnel pistol is 10-inch range, strength 4, AP dash, pistol 1, but pinning. That's great. Shrapnel bolters, comparatively, 18-inch range, strength 4, AP dash, rapid fire, pinning. Again, 0 complaints. The shrapnel cannon, you've got the same heavy 4 as the heavy bolter, same strength 5, AP 6, but I mean, is there much of a difference unless you're playing mortals? Same deal though, pinning. And then you've got the Gravis shrapnel cannon with 36-inch range, strength 5, AP 6, heavy 5, twin-linked, and pinning. I mean, pinning is terrific in this edition. It's so much worthwhile compared to last edition when everything had leadership 9 and could re-roll from the Vexilla. The pinning's your friend. Like, when something's pinned, it's more or less useless for a turn. Only snapshots for, shooting-based squads. Can't charge, can't react. It's pretty great.
Yeah, I love pinning.
Yeah.
I
sorry,
put it in,
go ahead, Jason.
put it on every weapon, every unit that I can find it. Just boop, pinning for everybody.
And I don't think they lose a whole lot on the shrapnel cannon or the Gravis shrapnel cannon so far as the reduced range. I'm still going back and forth on whether losing that 6 inches with the shrapnel bolter is worthwhile.
It's certainly rough if you are like you said, tactical to tactical, right?
Mhm.
You're probably going to take a round of shooting that you can't fire back from
Mhm.
before you get into shrapneling range, and it's even worse if you're against Alpha Legion.
It's a tiny bit of an issue too when it comes to things like Overwatch, because with a bolter, if you are being charged, you are within rapid fire range, but there's a 3-inch gap there for the shrapnel bolters, or asphyx bolters for the Thousand Suns, now that I think about it. But that's one of the things that Hammer of Olympia kind of helps bridge the gap, because you'll notice with Fury of Olympia, it's not the same as Fury of the Legion. You don't have to be stationary to use it. It's just a flat +1 to the number of shots fired when making shooting attacks with shrapnel bolters and pistols.
So you're basically always using it.
Yeah, and that's great when it allows you to, advance and still use it. Like we were talking about earlier on like-sized tactical squads shooting back and forth. You kind of help bridge that gap between another tactical unit that can Fury of the Legion back at you. Shooting them, getting just as many it's probably going to be, let's see, if you're at 9 inches to rapid fire, they're going to be able to rapid fire back with Fury, but this helps bridge that gap to bring you to 3 shots as well. So I do think it does a lot to kind of boost the math more in your favor.
Well,
Yeah,
I think
one fun thing about it too is that Hammer of Olympia at first glance should be tacticals, right? Like big blocks of tacticals.
Right.
But whereas Fury of the Legion is specifically only bolters,
Mhm.
Fury of Olympia is also shrapnel pistols. So you could, in theory, go big assault squads, right? Jump pack over and kind of mitigate the fact that you've only got a 10-inch range, double tap all those shrapnel pistols, pin your opponent,
Hang on.
charge in.
It's tactical squads.
Oh, damn it. Boo.
You got me all excited. I was thinking about, wait, all shrapnel pistols? Could you do it with Destroyer? But sadly, it is just tactical squads.
Womp, womp. Well, so much for Chainsaw Hammer of Olympia.
Jason, we can get a marker out and we can just change the book. And if you just show enough people, maybe the rules will change.
Yeah, well, I mean, you never know.
Dissemination of false information eventually makes it the most common belief.
Yeah. Oh, but before we forget, let's not forget the rest of the Hammer of Olympia Rite of War. It's not just Fury of Olympia. We got 2 more bullet points. All Legion Predator squads, Vindicator squads, Land Raider Proteuses, and Land Raider Spartan models Ignore the effects of crew shaken and crew stunned. That kind of flies under the radar to Fury of Olympia, but it's terrific. You basically just ignore the negative effects of half of the vehicle damage table.
Mm-hmm.
You're not snap shooting, you're not stunned in place. It's like free extra armor and auxiliary drive traction control.
Yep. Free rules from the government.
Yeah, cannot complain about that government cheese rule.
Yep. And it says like Vindicators, Proteus carriers, Predators, all that, but I really think the winner here is the Spartan. With Hammer of Olympia, you can make a incredibly simple list. Like you could buy 2 boxes of Age of Darkness and be set, right? You take at least 3, because that's how many heavy support squad slots you have. Fill it with Spartans. Fill those Spartans with shrapnel bolter toting tacticals, and just roll up, unload at 18 inches, go.
Ruin everyone's day.
Uh-huh.
And speaking of, last bullet point there, a unit composed entirely of models with the Iron Warriors rule that's part of a detachment with this right of war can reroll all fail to hit rolls of 1 for shrapnel pistols, bolters, cannons, and gravis cannons. So you will give a pretty big boost to those Fury of Olympia dudes, yet again, nudging that math better in your favor. However, that does include shrapnel cannons and gravis shrapnel cannons where Fury of Olympia does not.
Yeah,
Delicious.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of good stuff there. I mean, I think that like the biggest issue for me with like, for instance, shrapnel, like I do believe that outside of this right of war, losing that range, like having a heavy bolter become a shrapnel cannon means you're losing 12 inches of range, which is big. I mean, losing 12 inches on a heavy bolter is a big amount of range. But in this right of war, you're re-rolling 1s on your shots, right? If you're a tactical, if you're just a normal guy with a bolter, you're moving and shooting twice around, right? I feel like that's one of the things that gets lost a lot, is that, Fury the Legion is great, but every time you're moving, you have lost that offensive ability to shoot that extra time.
Right.
So when you're combining the extra shot and hopefully a 9-inch shot, a 9-inch rapid fire shot, that is a lot of shots. Now, the one thing we didn't mention, which is if you do take a shrapnel bolter, you cannot put a bayonet or
that is a good point.
Bayonet on the bolter. That was a big debate in the early editions. So I think the fax has cleaned that up.
Yeah,
because
they
pretty quickly.
are not bolters. Can't
Right.
carry,
sounds like
can't
a
do a
perfect reason
bayonet.
to buy a chainsword.
Right. So I think, I think at the end of the day, you weigh that. But I think in this right of war, where you can really have a very thematic list of Iron Warriors charging across the field, firing their shrapnel fletch shots all over the place, tearing stuff up, capturing objectives, being very rapid and mobile. That's probably a nice change if you're trying to play more of like a gunline army in the Iron Warriors. So playing a bunch of tacticals that moves forward and shoots a whole bunch of shots, that sounds like a lot of fun. And I'm really looking forward to getting my my Warsmith ready so I can roll that kind of list.
Yeah,
I love tacticals. They're so fun now.
a good point too is with that rerolling 1s, like Fury, it's not just for tacticals, it's across your army. So anything, vehicles, dreadnoughts, jet bikes, land speeders, if it has a shrapnel cannon or a gravis shrapnel cannon, you also reroll those 1s, which anything you can do to nudge that math in your favor. Oh, now, very slim limitations on this. It's not that big of a deal. You can't use deep strike assault, subterranean, or flanking. Makes sense. That's not really the Iron Warriors thing. And you must include a model with the Warsmith upgrade, or it must include Perturabo. So Eh, I mean, you're
Oh
probably
no!
right. It's
Heard a
like
Robbo or a Warsmith.
that's not going to go wrong. Like,
Yeah.
but next page over, Steve, do you want to tell us about some Ironfire, the other rite of war?
Yes. Although before I explain that, I would like to touch one more time on just how versatile tacticals are in this. Remember that even though you do have a shorter range because of all those shrapnel bolters, tacticals still have Heart of the Legion. So within 6 inches of objectives, you have a Fionopane, which does stack. So if you have an apothecary with your tacticals, at 6 inches to an objective, just hosing down the enemy with hot metal and bouncing everything else off of a 4-up Fionopane.
Right, and also if you're re-rolling ones and you bitter fury that giant Hammer of Olympia tactical squad, that is going to be a rude awakening for the person who gets that bitter fury reaction.
Mm-hmm. Yes, but yes, Ironfire. This is originally appeared in Book 6. It was the second Rite of War given over to the Iron Warriors. This is the artillery one. So if Hammer of Olympia is get up in your face and shoot you with a bunch of bullets, Ironfire is get up in your face and then shoot you with artillery. So here we go. The effects. Legion Arcwitter squadrons may be selected as non-compulsory troops in a detachment using this rite. Any weapon with the Barrage special rule fired by a model selected as part of this detachment using the Rite of War and targeting any point within 12 inches of a friendly unit composed entirely of Legiones Astartes Iron Warriors scatters D6 instead of 2d6, including when firing using the Barrage special rule. So whenever you're danger closing, you're way more accurate, way less likely to scatter off into wherever, or worst case scenario, into yourself. Any unit with the infantry type selected as part of a detachment using this rite that is within 12 inches of the final target point of a weapon fired using the Barrage special rule by a friendly model gains Stubborn, which is pretty great.
Yeah, no complaints
and
there.
Any unit using the infantry unit type selected as part of a detachment using this rite may reroll any failed armor saves taken against wounds inflicted by an attack made by a weapon with any variant of blast. Armor saves, not invulnerable saves. Sorry, Terminators. What is the cat mad about? You know what? I don't care.
I mean, could be anything at this point.
He's probably mad that the Porch Invader is back. There's another cat that comes by, and I think he just wants to be Sterling's friend, and Sterling wants to kill him.
Yeah, unacceptable. We have one here, sweetest cat in the world, owned by our neighbors named Mango. She's an absolute sweetie. My cat, Cataly Portman, absolutely wants to destroy her. Like, she fluffs up to like twice the size and just like definitely wants to throw them little bladed hands,
Yep. So limitations of Ironfire. Nobody can deep strike, subterranean assault, or flank. Again, not that big of a deal. It's probably not your style anyway. A detachment using this rite must include more squadrons of Arcwitter, Basilisks, or Medusas than it does units that include any model with the cavalry unit type. This is barely a limitation because you're probably not doing a lot of bikes and speeders. And any detachment in this Rite of War must include a model with Siegebreaker. Must be a Siegebreaker console. Again, not that big of a deal. Siegebreakers are really good.
They are pretty handy. I mean, what heavy weapon squad wouldn't want a Siegebreaker hanging out with them?
Mm-hmm. Now, what I like the most about Ironfire is that you can still basically play Hammer of Olympia with a different rite. Like, if you were to build the exact same army, for the most part, you could run Ironfire using all the same models from Hammer of Olympia, just adding in some artillery. You lose out on Fury of Olympia, but what you lose in like offensive output, and this can just be considered a basic comparison as well, you gain in Stubborn and way more long-range firepower.
Yeah, I mean, with the Legiones Astartes, like, ballistic skill of 4 across the board, you're scattering 2 inches tops.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Um, Say if you took the same list, right, Hammer of Olympia, and you bought 3 Spartans or rhinos or what have you, right, and you're just rushing up a wall of shrapnel-toting Iron Warriors, um, instead of pinning everybody, you just shell them into oblivion, into their component atoms.
Yeah, I mean, same basic effect.
Yeah. And a pinned enemy or a dead enemy is only slightly better than a pinned enemy.
Right? It's not that big of a jump.
Nope.
Also, just re-rolling the blast on infantry, I think can be overlooked also too. Just that defensive, because it's written in a way where you just sort of automatically go right. So I'm protecting them against my blast scattering into my dudes, but really it's just your whole army all the time. Like even if you have like one, you have one artillery piece, you're still getting that reroll, and so much of artillery in this edition is AP4 or above. So you're rolling your armor save. You're not going to invul. So you're rolling your armor save, and what's killing your normal power armored Space Marines is rolling a 1 or a 2. So getting to re-roll that 1 or a 2 ups the chances of your survival just so much more. So I think that alone is a really powerful one where, honestly, like, if you are running a Master of the Legion level unit, you want to run the Siege Breaker, this is an option you can throw on and just try it out, and you don't have to bring an entirely new list of models like Jesse was saying, where like you don't have to buy a bunch of Forge World bikes like you're running a White Scars list or something. You can literally just lay this template on and play with it and see the effects of it, which is a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to doing this one.
Yeah, I like it. It's not as, I think they used to have Fearless when within a certain distance of blast markers, but Stubborn's just as good. Wow.
Yeah, not complaining.
Yeah, it's cool. It's cool. It's not super fancy, but it is cool. You're basically getting heavy without paying for any of the downsides of heavy.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, you don't lose the movement. You can still run. It's good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of good stuff, how about we talk about the Warsmiths? The Iron Warriors do not get a unique console like, say, the Emperor's Children or the Sons of Horus. What they do get is the Warsmith, which pretty great across the board. Sort of similar for how the Thousand Sons can buy a Psyker pick one of the schools of psychonometry for their Praetors. Any single Legion Praetor, Cataphracti Praetor, or Tartaros Praetor, the Iron Warriors, can be upgraded to a Warsmith for 20 points. They gain a Cortex Controller, Servo Arm, as well as Master of the Automata and Battlesmith 3+. Small downside, you can't upgrade a Warsmith to a model with a Combat Bike, Jet Bike, or Warhawk Jump Pack.
I mean, we all know why you're making him a Warsmith, right?
Yeah, because you want to probably stick him in a unit of Damatar Ferrum and have a huge beat stick that isn't 450 points worth of Perturabo.
Yeah. I mean, it's also great if you're running Brethren of Iron. You can take some non-compulsory Castellax. You can take some non-compulsory Vorax, stuff like that.
Good point.
And stick him in there. I don't know why you'd want to run him with Vorax, because they're kind of fast and he's kind of slow. But in small point games, if you don't want to necessarily shell out for the Iron Circle, he can hang out with 2 Castellax and just have a grand old time.
I mean, why would you not want to shell out for the Iron Circle? They're pretty amazing, and we'll get to them in just a few.
I was going to say the other thing, too, about the Warsmith is, a 3-up Battlesmith, like, being able to repair something on a 3-up is not bad. There are definitely, like, Centurions and Legion things that don't necessarily actively do anything in certain units and in certain phases. So having a vehicle potentially that can scoot up and get a repair, or having a Terminator that you can potentially, or not a Terminator, a Dreadnought that you can potentially put a wound back on, that's something. That's something nice in an edition where hull points are hard to come by. This is, compared to other things like 40K where you're used to having like, wait a minute, I don't have 12 wounds. I think that this is a nice little thing that you can do with this model. But I will be honest, I have often, when I'm looking at like trying to build a list, I've often said I'd rather just have another Centurion. There's like so many Centurions, they do so many neat things, and for the points, if I'm not running a right, not having a master of the Legion sort of ability, I've often gone on the side of saying like, yeah, I'd like a master of signals, or I'd like a herald instead. That Battlesmith 3-up I think is an important piece of this.
Yeah, they are very flexible.
Well, plus, if nothing else, you look at it as you're buying a 20-point Power Fist and getting everything else for free.
Kinda, yeah. And they did clarify in the FAQ. This feels a little weird, but if you have a servo arm or a machinator array, you can choose to use all of your attacks with that weapon. Which is kind of weird for me because I'm used to the first edition where it was, even in here in the war gear, it says you have one additional attack with a servo arm that's strength 8 AP2, so power fist.
Yeah.
But what I wanted to do here a little bit is Iron Warriors get compared to Imperial Fists a lot, and that's boring. So I wanted to compare to the Iron Hands, who have a sort of similar upgrade in the Iron Father. And so their deal is the exact same thing. Any Praetor, Cataphractii Praetor, Tartarus Praetor with Iron Hands can be upgraded to an Iron Father. The difference is, let's see, the Warsmith is what, 20 points? The Iron Father upgrade is 65.
Whew.
Right? So you get Battlesmith 3+, and Feel No Pain 5+, a Machinator Array, and a Cyber Familiar. So that is, let's see, 25 and 15 is 40. 40 points just in war gear. So you're essentially getting Battlesmith and Feel No Pain for 25 points. Now, I will say it's a little bit of a misnomer because a Machinator Array gives you a +2 bonus to any Battlesmith you have. I'm a little disappointed that the servo arm in 2nd edition no longer gives you a +1 to Battlesmith. Just the Machinator Array now, along with that Cyber Familiar that bumps your invulnerable save up. You get a lot more stuff, but it's more than 3 times as expensive.
Well, the other thing too is the array, I believe, has like a flamer and a melta built in too,
does.
Which is pretty nasty.
It has a flamer and a Inferno pistol, yeah.
So from a hobby, I was just gonna say from a hobbying standpoint, a lot, and you see this a lot online. A lot of people, because we're the Iron Warriors, the Bitter Boys, GW hasn't given them their Praetor yet. Hasn't given them a lot of their models. Don't have any like. What's that word? Models. They don't have any actual actual things to paint. So you do a lot of kit bashing, which I actually enjoy, which is one of the reasons I chose the Legion. But an Iron Father's miniature, the physical miniature, is an excellent kit bash for a Warsmith. Just changing the symbol, maybe changing a weapon or changing a pose. But that's a really good model to use. So if you're a new player and you're like, where is the Warsmith where's the miniature? I can't find it. Well, there isn't one. There's an old 40K one that I would not pick up.
Oof. Man.
And exactly. Oof,
that old Metal Warsmith.
Woof, right. I would instead go with the Iron Father and modify it. I think it's the simplest, straightforward. It looks badass. I would go with that.
Well, so I mean, they do have a good one. It's just over in the Iron Hands listing.
It's just I'll take more.
Yeah, that's a way of
typo.
thinking about
It's
it.
a typo.
That's
It's
a
a typo.
philosophical
It's
way
an
to look at it.
oversight. Yeah.
Obviously
Yeah.
a typo.
I would still argue that even though the Iron Father comes with a triple the price of a Warsmith, he's still the cheaper option compared to the two. Because if you're buying a Warsmith, there's really only one reason for it, and that's you're putting him with robots.
But robots are terrific, and I can't put a
Yes.
price on that.
You can't.
I mean-
it's 150 points.
It's literally right there. It's the price.
Price is literally there.
I don't know. I think the Fury. I think that the Fury of Olympia, right, is a really good justification of a Warsmith. I mean, like, I think the robots are really awesome and really fun, and I think that, you know, if you build your army that way, great. But I think for a lot of players, the Warsmith is just a very iconic unit. There's a
Definitely.
lot of lore behind
Definitely.
it, so you want to see it on the tabletop. And you know, and the Fury Olympia is a really interesting right. So I don't think people should feel pressured to go get some giant robots with floppy resin hammers to go at the to go against their opponent.
Well, you know, at the end of the day, like I said, if nothing else, you now bought a Power Fist for 20 points.
Yeah. No worries
I
there.
never thought about that. That is a really good way to think about it. That you're getting Battlesmith, you're getting essentially a Power Fist that I didn't know. I thought like you were talking, Jason, you could literally only use it once in the combat. So the fact that you can be just like, nope, this robot arm is going to keep poking you in the eye. That is amazing.
It's like a scorpion tail on your Praetor.
Yes.
A strength 8 AP2 scorpion tail.
So, talking about Iron Warrior's weapons, how about we talk about all those cool gravitons right underneath the Warsmith entry?
Yeah, graviton crushers are a series of war gear that you can buy for characters. If he's got a power weapon, you can replace for graviton mace, which is basically strength user AP3 melee haywire. Not bad. If they have a thunder hammer, they can go up to the crusher, which is strength +2 AP2 melee unwieldy two-handed haywire. And a dreadnought can exchange its Gravis Power Fist for a Graviton Maul for 15 points. And it still has inbuilt weapons, but that's strength +2, AP2, melee, brutal 2, haywire.
So I'm not gonna lie, I don't put a whole lot of stock in the mace or the crusher.
Me neither.
Trading a thunder hammer for, if it was trading a power weapon for it, then yes, I could see it. But thunder hammers are pretty dope now.
Yeah, I also don't put a lot of stock in the Maul, like the Dreadnought Fist. And the main reason for that is that the Iron Warrior's Legion trait kind of overshadows both the Crusher and the Maul.
So I can make I'll make a defense for the mace, which is the smallest weapon. So here's my defense, because I pretty much agree with everything everybody's saying.
Absolutely.
I think you're better off using just a fist on the dreadnought than using the maul. I think the one argument I will make for a mace, right, is so if you've got like a sergeant, right, an attack squad, it's probably going to get mulched by most things that are not something that mirrors them, like another tack and another sergeant, another tactical squad. I know that when I play, that typically when my tacks are in close combat, it's because there's some dedicated melee unit that's trying to eat them. And so often my sergeant just gets fed to whoever is issuing the challenge. But what I will say is the exception to that is when it's like, say, trying to knock out a vehicle or trying to knock out a dreadnought. And so
For sure,
I
dreadnoughts.
I think the mace gives you the ability to, like, because a dreadnought can rarely challenge, there's a few exceptions, but most of the time a dreadnought is just stomping through your unit. And so having the sergeant regularly giving it, if it hits, it's got to hit. But if it can hit, getting that wound on a 2+ is really, really strong, at initiative. You're not hitting unwieldy to wound a dreadnought on a 2+. I think there's something to be said there. Um, but yeah, it's not a strong argument. I think it's fun. I think it's fun to model them with hammers. It stands out a little bit on the tabletop. With a mace, I mean, to model them with a mace. It stands out a little bit modeling wise. It's a little different than say like a sword. But yeah, it's not a strong argument. The other two, I just don't know why you would choose them.
Okay. If I could defend the Graviton Maul.
Uh-huh.
So, for a dreadnought, I think at first, compared to the Power Fist, it might not seem like the way to go. However, the downside is it is only Brutal 2 instead of Brutal 3. It is not locked to Strength 9. It's User +2, which still puts you at 9 AP2. Haywire is pretty brutal against other dreadnoughts and automata because it's like Fleshbane for automata and dreadnoughts, but with the added bonus of if you roll a 6 to wound, then it's an automatic wound that ignores armor and invulnerable saves. And it's like invulnerable rending almost against. It's pretty great, and while it is just brutal 2, you're still doing the same, wounding on a 2+ against a dreadnought that you
Right.
would if you were another dreadnought. You just X the invulnerables completely on a 6. 2.
Yeah.
It's a Gravis Power Fist is not a specialist weapon, neither is this, so you can upgrade it on a dreadnought with 2 punchy hands and pick one or the other. I like 2 close combat weapon dreadnoughts. I know I'm a little bit of a niche there, but still, I'm trying to make a small argument for it.
Yeah. I think if I'm hearing your argument right, you're basically saying in this case, when a dreadnought is Mike Tysoning another dreadnought,
Right.
they're trading a brutal for a 6+. You just got to take the wound. You don't get a chance to save it. And so,
hey.
and yeah, I think that you could make, especially in volume, if you have 2 melee weapons, you're attacking 4 times, right? They're base 3, I believe. You're
Yes.
attacking 4 times, and then you go to 5 if you're charging. You got a good opportunity to get a 6 or 2 on that roll if you're rolling. You're rolling like 10 dice if you're hitting with everything, which you have a fair chance, right? You're rolling a 4 to hit a lot of things, hit a majority. Right. So yeah, I can kind of see that. I'm not sold, but I'm at least hanging out at your shop where you're trying to sell me the Graviton Maul.
My problem with the Maul, at least, I mean, Jason makes good points in that it has a little bit more offensive output than just a straight up Gravis Power Fist. But my problem with it is that, for one, you got to pay 15 points for it, and I don't want to have to spend more points on my dreadnought. But secondly, it doesn't keep the other dreadnought from killing you just as easily.
True. However,
tends to be the problem when dreadnoughts meet, is if it's not mutually assured destruction, whatever dreadnought is left standing has like 1 wound left.
Except in the case of like Emperor's Children dreadnoughts, which gets that. So
the Emperor's Children dreadnought, the Marigal, stuff like that.
I did just think of something though that's again super niche, but it makes a Contemptor much more likely to be able to kill a Leviathan, because the Leviathan wounds the Contemptor's toughness 7 on 2s, where the Contemptor strength 9 against the Leviathan's toughness 8 wounds on 3s with the Gravis Power Fist.
It's still strength 10 because you're still Iron Warriors.
Oh shoot, you're right. Well, that was my last deal.
Get out of my house, Graviton Maul. I don't want you.
All right. And in the same direction, Graviton Mauls look super cool on the Iron Circle, and it's kind of neat that you have the option to put them on a Dreadnought. I just
Yeah, I
like
mean, if
that.
Graviton Mall show up on a unit, I'm not going to kick the Graviton Mall out of bed for eating crackers, right?
Right.
But I'm not going to switch out my Gravis Power Fist or my Gravis Chain Fist for my fancy electromagnetic mallet.
It's really cool, though, Steve.
But fists have fingers which can hold dead stuff.
Yeah, little hands, little grabby hands.
Yeah, I can't model a Dreadnought ripping a Space Marine in two if it has hammers for hands.
I mean, you could do it like smooshing him like a beer can.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, that sounds like a challenge. That sounds like an art challenge we should
Right.
post and see how many people are like show their amazing ability to do horrific things with giant hammers.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I want to see the John Henry of Dreadnoughts.
Yeah, exactly.
Delightful.
Double hammering it away.
Well,
Yeah.
Since we're talking about Graviton Mauls, this feels like a good time to get over into that other proponent of Graviton Mauls, the Iron Circle.
Wee.
So Iron Warriors, like, I love their whole vibe, but the Iron Circle is really what keeps me like coming back and trying to figure out like, okay, how could I work a fourth trader army into my rotation here? So these guys are the exact same Domitar from the Mechanicum list that you know and love, but re-equipped after, Perturabo had a little bit of a rough run in at fall. So across the board, they're pretty great statistic-wise for an automata. You've got move 8, weapon skill 4, ballistic skill 3, strength and toughness 7, just like a dreadnought, 5 wounds, initiative 3, attacks 3, leadership 8, 3+ save. And they are 150 points each, which is spectacularly cheaper from where they used to be. I think that's a 75-point drop from their initial incarnation in first edition. So these boys are automata with a cybernetica and heavy subtypes. So you can't run with them, but they're automata. They are cybernetica, however, which means that you do have to have that Cortex controller to keep them from derping around on their own. They have the shrapnel cannons, natively, Graviton Mauls, Carcerai battle shields, which are super fun. We'll get to that. These boys are relentless. They have Hammer of Wrath 3, which is dope.
Squish.
Right? 3 strength, 7 impact hits. Sorry. Hammer of Wrath. I'm a fantasy player by heart. It's pretty great. And you got Shielded Iron Tyrant. Also, you get a 15-point discount if you want to add up to 5 additional Domitar Ferrum, which I want just... I mean, if I make Iron Warriors, it's going to start with like 5 or 6 Domitar Ferrum and a Warsmith and go from there. Like, I'll be honest. So, let's talk about some of their unique fun stuff. Model with, let's see, the Carcerai Battle Shield. So this is like a, the Adamantic Deflector that Dreadnoughts have, but a little bit better. So gives you that same 5-up invulnerable, and if you suffer an instant death, you only lose D3, exactly like a Dreadnought. However, any charge that targets a unit with 1 or more Carcerai battle shields, which is not locked in combat already, counts is always resolved as disordered. That is spectacular. It's free hold the line.
Welcome back to old boarding shields.
Yes. So it's free hold the line that you don't have to spend your reaction on. And, they're robots, so they can't react. Downside there. But you lose that bonus attack, you lose the bonus initiative or strength from sudden strike or furious assault respectively, you lose rage, you really screw with White Scars and the Kantos Power Lance, if you wanted to, as if White Scars needed it. It's great, and it really, I think, helps cut down that downside of being automata and being unable to react. Now, Together with moving bulwark, which is also terrific. When a model with this special rule is in base contact with another friendly model that also has moving bulwark, both increase their invulnerable save by 1 step to a maximum of 4+. So sadly cannot boost your Master of Automata model that's hanging out in there with them, but it does boost them up to a 4+. And that is just flat, like +1 against shooting, against combat.
They're mean in combat now
Yeah.
because it's like T7 with 5 wounds and a 4-up invuln.
Yeah, it really helps them. At first, they're not a match one-on-one for a Contemptor, but 2 or more together gives you a better invulnerable. It gives you plenty of attacks with Haywire. They've got 3 attacks each, so even with weapon skill 4, rolling 5s to hit that dreadnought if you don't blind or concuss it or whatever, still pretty darn good odds considering you're working with Haywire anyway, and Brutal too.
Yeah, I think these guys are really well designed to just soak a lot of damage and then have whoever the HQ is deal out some serious pain. Whether it's Purdy, whether it's a Warsmith with a Thunderhammer, like whatever's in there, in the Contemptor versus Iron Circle matchup, I'm not even so concerned about what the Contemptor can, how bad the Iron Circle can dish out damage to Contemptor. I want the Iron Circle just to soak just damage and be repairable by a Battlesmith.
Mm-hmm.
And then also, is going to turn around and then the HQ is just going to deal a ton of damage back. So, yeah, so I'm not as concerned with the weapon skill. I mean, yeah, of course, if you could choose to have weapon skill 5, you would choose to have weapon skill 5. But, yeah, I think I think it's just an amazing unit at soaking damage.
Yep, and it bears noting as well that they hit like trucks.
Absolutely. Because
at weapon skill 4, they're not screwed hitting other Space Marines like most Cybernetica are, because they're going to hit on 4s. And they are base strength 7, but the Graviton Maul adds +2 to that. So they're just swinging hammers at strength 9.
Mm-hmm. Doubling out those Marines.
Mm-hmm.
2, you don't care about weapon skill with Hammer of Wrath. They hit automatically.
Yep.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
it's nothing to sniff at, just 3 strength 7 attacks at initiative 10, which they do struggle a tiny bit with initiative 3. It can kind of have a little bit of an issue of like chain bayonets or chain swords, kind of trying to dogpile wounds through on them. But I mean, other than that, and they're so inexpensive now compared to where they were. It's just 285, for 2 of them. That's great. It's a terrific little tool to have in the toolbox.
Mm-hmm. And they used to be HQ choices, didn't they? Like you had to either take them with Pert or with an Iron Warriors Warlord.
Like they had to go as a. Now that is one thing you reminded me of. A small downside. They no longer have the Guardian rule for the HQ. So you do have to, you can take them separately. They don't have to be a retinue, but they can only join something that has Master of Automata. So a Pravian, a Forge Lord, a Warsmith, or Perturabo himself.
Mm-hmm.
I am a little torn on whether I want to go with a Forge Lord or a Warsmith. Warsmiths are, of course, very iconically Iron Warriors-y. They're great. You can take a Terminator one, get a 4-wound dude in there with a good invulnerable save. They're
high
already
weapon skill.
Yeah, high weapon skill. They're already heavy, so like a dude in cataphracti armor isn't going to slow them down run-wise. However, with a Warsmith, you do not get what you do with a Forge Lord in a Machinator array, which is great. That boosts his Battlesmith up to pretty much the same. I do like the Machinator array a little bit better. It's a shredding Armorbane power axe as opposed to just a flat power fist. Um, and the Forge Lord can take a cyber familiar where the Warsmith cannot for some bogus reason. So that does help them against things like blinding is probably not going to happen to an Initiative 5 unit, but this makes extra sure it's not going to happen.
I kind of like the idea of a Pravian, honestly, because a Pravian will also unlock some Thalax, so you can kind of diversify your portfolio without having to bring allies or special right of war.
And you
Thalax,
have,
I think, make a fantastic like screen for Iron Circle. They just kind of zip around, lightning cannoning stuff.
Lightning guns are pretty
great. You do have a special character too, also Pravian, and that can tie back into what you're saying, where you can use the special character because Iron Circle is strangely not, even though they were created by Perturabo after the Battle of Fall, they're not locked to traitor. So you can have a loyalist Pravian running around with giant hammer shield robots.
Well, I mean, we wouldn't want to keep toys from the loyalists. That would hurt their feelings, and we can't have that.
True facts.
I mean, otherwise they'll go and tell the principal, like their mom will get dragged into it. It'll be a whole thing.
You can't take units from me. My dad owns a dealership.
Loyalists do occasionally have big "my dad owns a dealership" energy. And I mean, in case it's not obvious to our listeners, I mean, again, all three of us are dyed-in-the-wool super traders, so...
Yeah, you just had to listen to 2 Imperial Fist episodes, so I think it's time to balance the scales a little bit.
Right? The mods are asleep. Post-trader
content.
All right. Well, speaking of special units, let's talk about those Tyrant Siege Terminators. I feel like people that don't play Iron Warriors, if they know anything about the Legion, it's, hey, you guys have those Terminators that like shoot 1,000,000 crack missiles, right?
Can I do this one?
Absolutely. Take it away.
Okay. So this one's pretty easy. So basically, you take normal Cataphractii Terminators. They're 300 for a set of 5, right? They're basically stat line. They're Cataphractii Terminators. Nothing big there. They do gain firing protocols 2, which at first you're like, what? Why do they have firing protocols 2? Why do they have firing protocols 2? Because they come with their own type of rocket launcher. So they have the Tyrant rocket launcher. So they're everything you love about Cataphractii and Terminators with a rocket pack on the back, which is super epic. You can take 5 additional ones for 55 points. You can give them a Chain Fist if you really, really want, which is nice because the basic box comes with it. So does it come with the basic plastic box comes with the 2 Lightning Claws. So if you'd like to go more for just general infantry, you can also have that option. And you can, of course, take a Grenade Harness. But again, the money, what you're really going for the funsies, is you get 2 pieces of special equipment. The first piece of special equipment you get is an Omniscope. So this is only on your Siege Master, who is effectively like your sergeant. So you want to make sure he stays alive, because what the Omniscope does is a unit that includes 1 model with the Omniscope, which is going to be your Siege Master, ignores all effects of night fighting, which is amazing. Essentially, it also allows you to make the Interceptor advanced reaction, and this does not cost one of your the controlling player a point from their reaction allotment. Same normal rules. It doesn't let you make an extra reaction with the same unit, but does allow you to exceed the limit for 3 reactions in a phase. So you get night fighting, and you can make the free Interceptor in advanced reaction, which is amazing. And what are you making a reaction with? You're making the reaction with the Tyrant rocket launcher, which are these individual, they look to me, like when I look at them, I'm always like, aren't these cyclonic missile launchers? But they're slightly different. Their rules are they can shoot frag, crack, or flak missiles. The big difference, and you guys can help me out on this. I feel like the stats are slightly different from a Cyclone
From a
missile
regular.
launcher. Can you?
Let me see.
I
You
can
you keep
read
going, and
them.
I'll look
I
them up.
think they're different though, but maybe I'm wrong. They're all 48 inches because they're missiles. The frag is strength 4, AP 6, heavy 4 pinning, right? The crack is strength 8, AP 3, heavy 2. I think that might be one of the differences. So you're getting 2 shots.
Yeah, the Tyrant rocket launcher has one extra shot compared to just a regular missile launcher.
And then does a regular missile launcher automatically have flak? Because that's okay. So then
Yeah, same
flak is
range,
48.
same strength and AP, but bigger. Oh, interesting. Frag missiles for a regular missile launcher are blast. Frag missiles out of the Tyrant are just regular heavy 4 shots.
Huh. That is interesting.
Now,
So
looking at
yeah,
this,
I was just going to say the biggest things with this are crack missiles. You're getting 2 shots. In squad of 5, you're getting 10 crack missile shots. That is the same amount of missile shots that a heavy support missile squad would do. So that is very, very impressive. My main issues with this unit are it's expensive. It's 300 points for the squad of 5. It doesn't have AP2 outside of, its Power Fist, which it natively comes from. But this squad just wrecks normal power armor Marines. Like, you will just tear through them.
now looking at them and kind of going off of what your issue with them is, that it's 5 guys, right, for 300 points. That's pretty expensive. Here is a perfect unit to put a Tyrant of the Lasatra in, because all of these missiles already have +1 over their regular missile counterpart. Tyrant of the Lasatra lets them add another shot to it. So your frags become heavy 5 pinning, your cracks are heavy 3, your flaks are heavy 3. When they return fire because they have to, or when they do Bitter Fury because they have to, that's 10 frag shots per guy, 6 crack shots per guy, or 6 flak shots per guy. That's so many rockets, and
Gross.
all you had to do was put your warlord in them.
Right. And it's relentless, so you can move these guys up the board if you need to get them closer because of some sort of range issue. Their weapons are not AP2, so if they do get hot, they're rolling their armor save, and so they'll probably be fine. So it makes for a very powerful unit.
Oh, yeah. It is kind of, it's definitely threat red tier 1. That's got to die first for your opponent.
Yeah, and it's just that's so much firepower.
So what's interesting, they're a little bit different. I was just comparing them to the Cyclone missile launcher for the Javelin. A little bit different there too, because their version of the frag is the same strength and AP, but it's heavy 1 large blast as opposed to heavy 4 pinning. I kind of like the Tyrant more.
Oh yeah, well, we've all fired Tempest bolts from first edition. Having to resolve more than 1 blast from a unit is a huge pain in the ass.
I'm guessing that's why they did it.
Probably.
2, it's really nice. They come stock with flak missiles as well for strength 7 AP 3. Combined with that omniscope, they ignore the effects of night fighting, and it gives them a free interceptor reaction, just like an augury scanner. So, it's actually a little bit better than an augury scanner because they just flat ignore all the effects of night fighting. So the ballistic skill penalty, the range penalty, the leadership penalty. That's great.
And I would say strength 8, basically strength 8 flak rockets, because the only thing you're ever firing at is airplanes.
Yeah, vehicles anyway.
Those are fairly lightly armored to begin with.
Right, and your Legion trait, your crack missiles are going to be effectively strength 9.
Right.
Which taking 10 of those shots at pretty much any vehicle is going to be horrendous. But the night fighting is a big one too. A lot of my games we're playing night fighting. I think it depends on your meta. Some places, I feel like when I listen to other podcasts, some places don't seem like their meta is really employing night fighting, and maybe it's because me and Jason just play each other,
Right.
and we're like team night fighting. We're always
So
waking up in the
great.
middle of the night to have start our battles. Waterloo starts at 1 a.m. Be ready. Um, but but I mean that is huge because you don't have to put. There's a lot of Centurion or equipment sort of babysitting that you do for heavy weapon squads.
Right.
And so not having to pay for any of that, having this be a much more mobile, um, again, a mobile unit that doesn't really need a babysitter, that is a huge threat. That ties in with the Legion trait and with the reaction. I just think that this is an amazing unit to pretty much have in any Iron Warriors army.
Yeah, because I mean, too, when you've still got that bitter fury in your back pocket, like nobody's going to want to shoot at these guys because it's just they're absolutely going to get plastered with crack rockets in return.
Yeah, and you would think that the thing you'd want to shoot at them are rending guns, which are like autocannons, so space marines, uh, tanks,
Hmm.
vehicles. They can, anyone that looks at them funny, they're going to return fire or bitter fury back and just wipe it off the table.
Right.
Yeah, the only thing you're probably going to struggle with them is dreadnoughts. Because they're AP, because they're armor 2 up.
Right.
They have a high toughness. You're going to probably wound them, but they're going to be they're only going to be taking a wound on a 1. So that's the only one that I would avoid the temptation of peppering that thing with your crack missiles. I would instead save it. But planes. I mean, these things are going to wreck planes coming in from reserve. They're going to get their interceptor. It probably will be in range because of 48-inch range. They don't care about night fighting. So if night fighting's going on in round
Right.
2, they're going to still hit the plane. So if your opponent's rolling planes up to the board and they see these models, they'll definitely be sad faced because yeah, it's a very, very, very versatile unit.
Okay. Well, that's a pretty. I mean, really, their only downside dreadnoughts and maybe the 300-point price tag.
No, I mean, I wouldn't even necessarily be super afraid of dreadnoughts, because it's 5 guys firing 2 rockets. That's 10 rockets, or 5 guys firing 3 rockets with a tyrant to the Lasatra. 15 strength, 9 rockets. I don't care how like honored of a warrior you are. You're not going to make all those saves.
Probably not. Well, in that same vein, let's jump over here a little bit. The Iron Warriors did catch a little bit of an unfair hand, I feel, with Liber Hereticus, because some of their best things were left out, like Iron Havocs, only to end up in the Legacy document. So while we're here, and before we talk about special characters, let's check out Iron Havocs. So these guys are 135 for 5. You've got a pretty standard Marine stat line across the board, except ballistic skill 5. They are leadership 7 with 8 on the sergeant, so not quite as good as some other standard elites that are like 8 and 9. They're heavy as standard. They come stock with shrapnel cannon, bolt pistol, grenades, and the Ferrum Oculus. So the Ferrum Oculus, shooting attacks made using this weapon with a heavy type, gain precision shots 6+, as long as the attack is not a reaction or a snapshot. And they have the options to upgrade that shrapnel cannon with autocannon for free, missile launcher with frag, crack, and flak for 5, or las cannon for 15. The Iron Havoc Sergeant can take a couple of, power weapon, power fist, artificer armor, nuncio vox, melta bombs. These guys feel like they're in a little bit of an odd spot. So clearly they're slightly better heavy weapons teams. The downside is those las cannons are pretty expensive. The Ferrum Oculus feels kind of odd because if you compare them to something like the Emperor's Children, have these Sun Killer veterans. Those dudes are pretty nasty. They've got like the same ballistic skill 5, but also as long as they are not making like a snapshot, you can't take a like an evade or cover save against them. And that's pretty good. What do you guys think? Like they're inexpensive, like it's 135 for 5 to start. Clearly, like you can't complain at a heavy weapons squad with ballistic skill 5, but other than that, they feel like a little awkward to me.
Yeah, I think that their fluff doesn't quite match their rules.
Hmm.
And I think that can be discouraging for players, especially new players, because I think a lot of people wanted them to be sun killers. I think they wanted them to be exactly what you were saying earlier. Because sun killers are amazing at knocking out vehicles, knocking out big targets. And I
Hmm.
think the Iron Havocs are better at I mean, they'll still do that. Don't get me wrong. You put las cannons in, they'll still do that. But what I think they really shine, where I really think they shine, is if you want a las cannon squad, heavy support squad, I think there's a really good argument of just going heavy support and putting some sort of leader, some sort of HQ in there, some sort of centurion, that gets them a Cognos, that will get them up to ballistic skill 5 effectively, because a Cognos gives you night fighting and +1 to ballistic skill.
Hmm.
So getting up that in a heavy support squad can a lot of times mimic what the Havocs do. Where I think the Havocs can shine, and what I've seen people doing with them is running them either with the shrapnel cannon, which they come equipped with, or the auto cannon, which is free. So the auto cannon, we've already talked about how the Iron Warriors Legion trait natively makes an auto cannon a much scarier weapon.
Right.
And then you give it ballistic skill 5, right? So it's hitting on a 2. And then you effectively, because of the Ferrum Ocularius, you give it a precision strike. And natively, an autocannon also has rend on a 6-up. So now you've got a squad, a highly accurate squad, that can pick units out, pick models out of a unit with precision shots. And when they are doing precision shots, they're also rending. So I think these guys can be amazing anti-infantry unit, especially if you need more volume of fire. Bitter fire. So now they're shooting 4 each. That, or you put the HQ with the Warlord trait to give them more shots on the return. Again, I think that is where they really shine. I don't really think it's points effective to use these guys as a dedicated anti-tank dreadnought weapon unit. But that being said, if you did it, I don't think you're doing anything wrong. Like, I still think you'll see lots of success. I think it's just not necessarily maybe the most points effective use of this unit.
Well, talking about points effective, again, comparing them to the Sun Killer squad, the Sun Killers also start out at 5 guys, but they're 185 instead of 135. And here's the fun part. You can take up to 15 more in that squad, and they're 40 points each.
Yeah.
They come stock with a las cannon.
Yeah. Are you not going to then throw in an apothecary? Like, I feel like if you're in for a penny, you're in for a pound at that point.
Right,
Like,
right.
you might as well give it, like, a new paint job. You might as well, like, every single,
Exactly.
like, one of those little surf models, that's, like, polishing the gun. If that guy costs 5 points, just throw him in there, too,
Well, I
It's,
mean,
yeah,
it's
such an
Emperor's Children.
expensive. Yeah, exactly. He's definitely getting a clean model. Yeah, I definitely think that at this point, yeah, the Sun Killers are so expensive. But I do understand players' frustration when they're like, yeah, I want it to just do the thing it does in the fluff. So
Yeah.
when that disconnect happens, I feel like that's a type of frustration, and points are a different type of frustration. But I do think they're a cool unit. I'm personally really glad that they upped our massive footprint in the Liber Heretics, where we had like the literally the least amount of pages of any legion. So I'm glad they included these. They're an iconic unit. Yeah.
Okay. So, the other interesting unit we got to talk about that's also not in the book itself is the Dominator cohort. So these guys are the unique close combat Terminators, and they are a lot cheaper than the Tyrant Terminators, but a little less immediately, as brutal as they are. So let's check these guys out. They're 0 to 1 for 225 for 5 to start. They have a weapon skill of 5 and a leadership of 9, which is pretty great. You've got a Combi Bolter Thunderhammer, and they are in Cataphracti armor. They are relentless, stubborn. They have Hatred Automata. They have the special rule, those once honored. They are bulky and chosen warriors. And just like normal Terminators, you can take a Proteus, but interestingly enough, you cannot take a Spartan, which is annoying at first, but it kind of plays into their fluff of kind of being out of touch and kind of a relic. Because these dudes are basically the guys that got replaced by Perturabo for the Iron Circle. And let's see, they've got a couple of options going on. You can take up to 5 more for 40 points. For every 5 models, you can take a Heavy Flamer for 10, a Reaper Autocannon for 15, or a Multi-Melta, which is pretty nice and unique amongst Terminators for 25. I think only the Just Aaron can also do that. You can swap out a Thunderhammer for a Chain Fist. I don't know if you ever would. It is free, but I mean, you're an Iron Warrior, so anything you'd be hitting and getting a bonus for a Chain Fist
Yeah, I don't think you'd do it. I
Yeah.
think you'd keep that Thunderhammer.
Yeah, because Brutal is just so terrific, especially when you're Strength 9 against Dreadnoughts.
Yeah.
It's pretty great.
Yeah.
Then you can take the normal, standard, Magna, or Minor Combi Weapon for 10 or 5 points each. Then you've got Those Once Honored, which is a combination of the Retinue Squad, just like any other Retinue Squad, but also you can only take these as a Retinue Squad for Perturabo. So these guys, if you take them as a Retinue Squad, just like normal, they don't take up that Elite slot. They have to be put with Perturabo, and you have to deploy them, again, just like a Retinue Squad. However, if they do that, they lose Hatred Automata and instead gain Feel No Pain 6+. And if you do that, then the army may not include any Iron Circle Domitar Ferrum. You had me, again, up until that last sentence, no Iron Circle, I'm out. I'm a head out.
Yeah, I think this. I mean, I will defend these guys. I'll be the public defender here. I really like this unit for a lot of reasons. The first reason is that weapon skill 5 for Iron Warriors is very difficult to come upon.
Right.
They're all the standard units that have them is effectively how you get access to them. This is your elite Terminator weapon skill 5 unit. Most legions, I feel like, have some version of an elite weapon skill 5. And I feel like, as far as close combat, we were talking about wanting to get into close combat, wanting to not be a one-sided army, because I don't want to play the Tau of the 40k Tau of Horus Heresy. I want to be able to have some units that can fisticuffs and have some fun in assault. And I think this is it. I think if you want an elite unit that can fisticuff and has a good chance against a lot of models, it has a lot of rules that I appreciate. I appreciate that these guys are just straight up stubborn. That is nice. Chosen warriors, that is great. To protect an HQ character that's running along with them. The Thunderhammer access. Leadership. Leadership 9. Again, across the board, I think this is a great unit. This is one I'm looking forward to building in the future. Yeah, I think it's great. I think they've got fun fluff. These are the bitter of the bitter boys. That they, again, it's the super purdy thing to be like, you failed me. And so instead of you guys being my friends, I'm going to go make my friends in my garage with spare parts and light bulbs. That seems like a very Bertarabo thing to do. Yeah, I like these guys a lot.
Well, what I was thinking about comparing them to a standard Cataphractii Terminator squad, you're actually getting a pretty substantial discount. Because just like at baseline, a 5-man Cataphractii squad with Thunderhammers on all 5 guys is going to be 250 points. And then you don't get the Leadership 9, you don't get the Weapon Skill 5. It's a little niche, but you don't get Hatred, Automata, and you definitely don't get Stubborn.
Or Chosen Warrior.
Yeah, or Chosen Warrior. So I feel like they are a lot better than that initial, like, to be fair, the initial read over I gave them.
Yeah, I did the same thing where I looked at these guys and I was like, well,
yeah,
they don't have some special rule that's really like blowing, knocking me down. But the more I look at them, the more I play Iron Warriors, the more I feel like they fit. They can fill a hole in the army, and the hole in the army, just getting the Liber Hereticus units is that elite Terminator squad that can run in and can do melee with other elite melee squads.
Right. So, yeah, I think that's a pretty good point. They do fill that gap of a heavy weapon skill 5 melee unit. And, you're not gonna expect them. Like, setting up across from an Iron Warriors player, you're gonna expect, like, a whole boatload of shooting. You're not gonna expect weapon skill 5 heavy combat Terminators.
Right.
I will say I am a little inherently biased against Cataphractii Terminators just because I feel like it's kind of crippling to have a melee unit that can't sweep a unit it beats in combat. But, when you have like a whole boatload of weapon skill 5 Thunderhammer attacks, it's kind of like Fire Drakes, right? You're probably not going to have a whole lot of a squad to sweep in the aftermath anyway.
Yeah, and also too, I think you pick your target, right? And,
right.
One of the things that I think you can do with Iron Warriors is they have tools to kill tax, right? They have tools to kill power. They have a lot of different tools to kill power armored Space Marines. I think these are the guys that you look across the board and you go, oh man, there's that amazing, Terminator squad, elite Terminator squad that if I don't put something in front of it, it's just gonna, as I said earlier, Pac-Man through my army.
Right.
So this is at least like a really cool potential speed bump for one of those amazing, elite other unit squads. Also, too, I think, it should be noted that for new players, when you're buying the base box, this is a great thing. Like, these are literally like, there's a lot of ways to get a hold of plastic Thunderhammers on eBay and other sites. You can 3D print them.
And
so I think it's really easy to slap on some Thunderhammers on your basic box, put them in a Spartan. Yeah, you can't get a dedicated transport, but a Spartan is a great heavy support unit anyway. It's really fun, it's really thematic, and it comes in the base box. Throw them in the Spartan and roll them down the board. And I think that's a fun thing for new players that, is an option to do, that you don't need to buy special resin elite unit Terminators.
That is not a bad point overall. So, I feel like we've talked about some of the retinue units for him a lot. But I feel like we can't wrap up here without talking about Perturabo and his ride, the Tormentor. So let's check out Perturabo here first. We're looking at 425 for the Master of the Iron Warriors, the Lord of Iron, the Hammer of Olympia himself. We're looking at movement 7, weapon skill, ballistic skill 7, strength 6, toughness 7, 6 wounds, initiative 5, 6 attacks, leadership 10, and a 2+ save. He's got the standard suite of Primarch special rules from his unit type. And he's got frag grenades, a Cortex controller, and his special armor, the Logos. Special rules-wise, same LA Astartes Iron Warriors. He's got Master of the Legion, Master of Automata, which is great, Battlesmith 2-up, Firing Protocols 2, Traitor and Sire of the Iron Warriors. And his one and only option, not counting Tormentor, you can give him Forgebreaker Desecrated for 35 points. I think now for 35 points stacked on his 425, it does bump him up to one of the more expensive Primarchs. But Forgebreaker Desecrated is pretty great.
Yeah, the 2 quick points I would add into what you're saying. So they did fax out the firing protocols too. There's a lot of like debate about what that meant, but they faxed that out in the latest fax. So it doesn't have that anymore. Yeah, Forgebreaker getting the Brutal 2. I wish it was the same Forgebreaker that Manus hit you in the face with, because that is Brutal 3.
Yeah.
I think that might be one of the bitterest cuts of all for Iron Warriors players. They reduced that from 3 to 2. But yeah, getting the Brutal 2 and the AP 1, especially if you're probably going to be in a challenge if you're taking on anything that's dedicated close combat.
Right.
You're probably in a challenge with Perturabo. So going last is a problem, but he's initiative 5 anyways.
Mm-hmm.
So you're probably not beating anybody on initiative, even with your regular close combat weapon, your Logos fists.
Right.
So yeah, in Mastercrafted, again, that's another thing that gets overlooked. But being able to reroll 1 Strength 12, AP 1, Brutal 2 strike can make a big difference in a fight.
It is a little bit annoying too that Forgebreaker, when Ferris has it, it's initiative 6, but when Perturabo uses it, it's unwieldy. Again, like, we don't want to hurt loyalist feelings, but that's a little lame, guys.
Yeah, I feel like Purdy needs to slap another like double D battery into the back and knock it up to its full potential.
Right.
It is interesting. I am curious why they made those changes. I'm always curious because we don't get a writer's notes on these kind of things usually.
Very true.
It is interesting. But yeah, we can go back to discussing some of the other aspects of Perturabo.
So, Sire of the Iron Warriors, pretty decent. So that's his Warlord trait. All models with Iron Warriors and the infantry type in the same army as Perturabo roll an additional dice when making morale or pinning tests caused by shooting attacks and discard the die with the highest result before the result of the check. Kind of a little bit of a callback to their first edition deal.
Yeah.
Which isn't quite as good as essentially Fearless versus shooting, but definitely makes you more solid. And then, of course, Perturabo also gets an additional reaction during the shooting phase.
Yeah, I think his Warlord trait is actually pretty strong. I mean, I think, and this is maybe skipping a little ahead to the end of my ideas, but I really feel like Perturabo is in he's not in the melee tier of Primarchs. He's just
Right.
not. As soon as you see weapon skill 7, you know he's not that top tier of melee Primarchs. Um, but what he does is a whole bunch of amazing buffing.
Hmm.
Or not a whole bunch. He does some amazing buffing in that. And I don't know. For me, one of the reasons why I like the fluff of Iron Warriors is they're pretty unflappable, right?
Right.
They're famous for just doing what they do, taking their licks, not running away, getting the job done. And so I think this Warlord trait. I was happy when I read this because I really do think it fits in with what you want the Iron Warriors to do, which is like stoically take a bunch of fire and then return the fire. And I think they allow that. The shooting reaction is my favorite reaction currently. I may change as I play, but I really like the extra shooting reaction. So I think his Warlord trait is one of the best things about him.
I think you're right. Like he's never going. A Primarch is never going to be weak. I mean, they're always going to kick over whatever they run into, except if it's another Primarch. Um, but yeah, I think you're right. It does make the entirety of your army so much more solid against a lot of the things in second edition that now cause like problems. Pinning is so much more prevalent and so much more devastating than it was in the first edition. And while occasionally, like, people compare Perturabo to, say, Dorn and Ferris, um, but he really kind of comes out pretty well. He does have a 2-up armor, 3-up invulnerable, which is pretty nice. Also ignores all the effects of night fighting. Entertainingly, Primarchs already ignore most of night fighting because they're immune to anything that affects their stats negatively. But he also ignores that 6 inches it would have shaved off of his little Logos array ranged attack here.
Which is not a. I mean, I don't have all the other Primarch stats memorized, but I would bet that this is one of the best range weapons that, if not the best range weapon any of the Primarchs have. Because I mean, Assault 6, Twin Link, Shred, Penning, Shell Shock 1 on an AP3 weapon with a 30-inch range. I mean,
Yeah.
that will do some damage.
With a lot of the Primarchs, it seems the ranged weapon is really kind of an afterthought.
Right. Here's your fancy bolter.
Yeah. I mean,
Pistol. I mean, here's your fancy pistol.
Right. And they all have cool names like the Spite Furnace, which is mastercrafted plasma pistol. Who cares?
Right.
I kind of I love Angron as a Primarch, both like in the fluff and on the table. It's a little frustrating. He's not weapon skill 9 anymore like he should be. But, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
Getting off. But yeah, I think you're right. Perturabo is one of the only Primarchs where it doesn't feel like the ranged weapon is an afterthought. Maybe
No.
Ferris. Like Ferris has a little plasma blaster, but even then, I think you end up better here.
Yeah, I think he's a really. I mean, again, an also fun thing about his Warlord trait is he doesn't even have to be on the table.
Yeah.
So you could be theoretically bringing him in from reserve, and he's still benefiting the whole board, which is nice. So he can be in his plane, like in orbit or something, and he's still benefiting the whole army. Yeah, I mean, I think if you're playing this game, as far as what is optimal, I don't think Purdy is an optimal Primarch, but I think he does add a lot of value to the army as a whole, which I think is nice, as opposed to just because a lot of times we talk about the Primarchs being kind of boring on the tabletop because they're
Right.
basically just close combat monsters.
They're the same giant beat stick.
Yeah, exactly. They're different flavors of the same ice cream, but Perturabo is different than that. Perturabo is if you don't get him into close combat every single round, you're not going to feel bad. You're not going to be like, oh, this is a total waste of my points.
He's still doing stuff.
Yeah, and if you're playing a really, really big game, I mean, imagine playing like a 3,000 to 6,000 point game.
Right.
Perturabo is an amazing warlord to have for like an actual Siege of Terror style war, where having that one amazing close combat Primarch
Mhm.
suddenly becomes much less impressive compared to Purdy. So, yeah, I think in a big game, you will see a huge force multiplier by including him.
Right. Again, because he just makes the majority of your infantry just so much more solid and
Yeah.
reliable.
Without needing to somehow figure out a way to put fearless or stubborn into all the units you're terrified are going to run away round one because of night fighting and getting shot or something.
Exactly. So just to kind of wrap up here, let's talk about the Tormentor because it's funny and I
It's
want
so
to.
funny. It's so funny.
So this guy is more than double Perturabo's base cost at 900 points. Looking at move 10, he is a ballistic skill 5 Shadow Sword. Front and side armor 13, rear 12, 12 hull points, 24 transport capacity. What you want to stick in there, I have no idea. It's a little ridiculous. But
Yeah. And Jason, if you really wanted to include two of these in your army, I know you did. They are unfortunately a unique type, so you
yeah,
will not be able to
yeah,
include your double
just to
Tormator list
clarify,
that you've been working on for months.
because you can only take Perturabo. You can only take the Tormentor if you have Perturabo, and even then, like, gosh, what would that be? So he's 465 with Forge Breaker, and then you got 900 points for this dude is 1365. So that means you need to play a minimum of a 5,460 point game, 5,500 points, in order to take the Tormentor and
Yeah,
have it.
just an easy Sunday afternoon game
Yeah,
with your
right?
friends.
So, what do you get for these 900 points? Well, you get a turret-mounted volcano cannon, which is nice because the Shadow Sword is hull-mounted. This is turret-mounted.
Oh, that is a
Um,
big difference,
yeah,
actually.
360 degrees. You got a hull front-mounted twin-linked heavy bolter. You got a left-mounted twin-linked heavy bolter and las cannon, and you got a right hull-mounted twin-linked heavy bolter and las cannon. Then you got smoke launchers and a searchlight because, I mean, at this point, 900 points, of course it comes with a searchlight, so it's
Yeah,
lit up like a disco ball.
right.
It does have Legionis Astartes Iron Warriors, so strength 15 on that volcano cannon. Um, so yeah, you instant death dreadnoughts.
Yeah.
That's fun. It's got one void shield, which is hilarious. And it has the torment special rule, which just is any army with Perturabo has the Tormentor as a dedicated transport for him. Doesn't take up an additional force org, but it must still be paid for part of the army and count towards the maximum combined Lords of War and Primarch. So I guess technically you don't have to take Perturabo first. This can just be your Lords of War. It's just you can take it as a
Yeah.
dedicated transport. Because, why not?
Yeah, 24 transport is pretty significant. I think, yeah, it's pretty large. But yeah, again, at 900 points, this thing better make me lunch and make
Right.
sure that I have a ride to game. Like, it just, 900 points is so many points.
Right.
Especially, it is a super heavy, right? But there's so many things that can knock this thing down quickly. It's
hmm
not even
hmm
armor 14, it's armor
It's not.
13. So it's going to it's going to draw all the fire it should.
Right.
But I think it's, fluffy. I know a lot of people from 1.0, especially really hardcore Iron Warrior players, they have a model that represents this.
Of
So I'm really
course.
glad that they can field this on the tabletop because nothing's worse than having your favorite model that you worked really, really hard on suddenly not be playable. So I'm glad that they did include this in the list, even as silly as a 900 point
Right.
Shadow Sword is.
It's yeah, it's there. You can use it, even if it's not 100% optimal.
Yeah. I mean, it's gonna do some amazing stuff. Like whatever you point at it is gonna. I mean, with ballistic skill 5, you're gonna wreck some stuff. You're gonna seriously wreck some stuff. Um, and it's also a thing you can get in plastic and kit bash. So you can get the shadow sword. You can get. I think people who kit bash this, like they combine 2 versions of the Baneblade kit.
Right.
They buy the Baneblade box, and then they combined. I think it's maybe the Stormlord. It's whichever one has the transport capacity.
Right.
They combine that with the Shadow Sword, ginormous gun, and and they make an amazing model. So I'm glad to see it's in a thing. I just, as a new player, I look at this and go, yeah, I'm gonna pass for now.
Fair. Well, that about does it for us. Brennan, anything you'd like to add here at the end for our listeners that have hung on with us for this long?
Yeah, so thanks for making it this long. I appreciate it. I also want to just thank the Remembrancers Retreat podcast as a whole for including me in this. I hopefully will come back for more things. This is I love you guys. I love the podcast, and I'm very happy to be a part of it. If you want to communicate with me, I'm on Instagram. I'm at Glenn Henry Raw, so R-A Raw, Glenn Henry Raw. If you want to communicate with me, send a message. Show me your Iron Warriors, or check out my Iron Warriors. That'd be great. And again, thanks, Jesse, Jason. This was awesome. I had a blast.
Glad to hear it. Well, folks, that is the majority of everything from us. We love you all dearly. Come back, listen to more of me, listen to more of Brennan, Steve, Jesse, all the rest of the crew coming up shortly. Take care, guys. Peace out.
Starting with our Legion Praetors, Alex Self, Captain Sasquatch, Chap Lannisar, Chris Mack, Gardner.Tree of Woe, Joe from Music City Heresy, Lou Pizzuto, Matthew Boyce, Michael Tisdall, Mr. Baldrick, Nick Quanga, Rita the Fleet, Sarah Luther, Marion Hammer, and Zachary Thompson. Our Legion Centurions, Aaron Bainler, Andrew N., Dave Jones, Duncan, Corpro, Life Subaquatic, M. Tanzer, Matthew Andriasio, Nick Hilden, Richard Bork, Scott LeMay, Zorin, and Winter. And finally, our Legion Sergeants, Aircraft Terrier, Wolf Arias, Dale Jones, Emily O'Hare, Eric Dacus, Garrett Lowe, Hard Fries, James Sales, John Crane, Carl, Alan Atkins, Matt Volstadax Monstrosa, and Travis Smith. Once again, thank you all for your support. We greatly appreciate it. And now we're back